Good afternoon, everybody. So quiet. Feel free to say hello if you want to.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hello.
It's nice to see people's faces and to know you're there. So, hello, Michael, who's just put in the chat.
Hello, Kathryn.
Hello. Hi, Sue.
So some of us are here.
Yes, yeah, it looks like quite a lot. So that's nice.
Yes.
Hi, Kathryn.
Hello, Caroline. Hi.
You in sunshine? You look as if you're in the light somewhere.
No, I'm in my garden shed. Stroke office.
Oh, Anya, lovely to see you, Anya.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming today. We've got a really good turnout. That's lovely. It's because ironwork and seaside metal is obviously very appealing. There's so much of it, isn't there? So that's what we're going to explore today. How are we doing, Anya? Have we got everybody, or reckon so? Right. Okay. So our title for today's seminar is Any Old Iron, and I thought I would just start by sharing a quote from this book, which is going to be backwards, but it's called The Unsophisticated Arts by Barbara Jones. It was published in 1951, and she was very fascinated in sort of the vernacular of the seaside, amongst other things. She writes about canal barges and folk art and that kind of thing. But she had this lovely phrase where she talks about cast iron as being the skeleton framework of the whole pleasure shore. Neatly contemporary with the 19th century's invasion at strength of the coastline of Britain, cast iron was able to provide not only almost the entire new range of necessities, the piers, pavilions and bandstands for the sun, the shelters and winter gardens for the rain, but to provide them cheaply and most richly decorated. It makes the piers, lifts, pavilions, bandstands, kiosks and information bureau, but above all it makes the endless railings, the lamps which rise regularly above them, the seats in their infinite variety of scrolls and grotesques, and the shelters and fountains which punctuate the promenade. And that's why it's important, because it's still everywhere, isn't it? The idea of today is to take three case studies. So we're delighted to have Alex, Faye and Tristan with us. So hopefully we'll have time for a bit of a discussion and questions at the end. So if you want to put any chats in, any questions in the chat as you go along, feel free. We're going to start with Alex, who has recently retrained in heritage and now works as the Heritage at Risk Officer based in Sefton Council. And her job is about working with owners to address deterioration in buildings and also identifying inappropriate development in conservation areas. So pretty important stuff that can be both conservation areas, locally listed things, and those on the Historic England at Risk Register. And she's going to be talking to us this afternoon specifically about the verandas in Southport. So Alex, if you want to share your screen, we'll get started. Thank you.
I will do. Okay, is that coming up?
Yeah, we've got that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm here on behalf of Sue Latimer, who's decided a holiday was, I'm afraid, too important. So she's on holiday and I'm here. But it's actually quite important because the verandas are actually quite a big part of what I end up dealing with in my roles. So I will do a little bit of history about the verandas, about Southport. So I'll just for those that aren't as familiar with Southport. So Southport actually sits on the Lancashire coast, and we're just south of the Ribble estuary. And really, until the end of the 1700s, it was just sandhills. The only real settlement was actually a village of North Meals, which is now what we call Churchtown, and that's slightly to the north of Southport. And the gentleman that you can see on the slide there is William Sutton, who was an inn owner in Churchtown. And he started taking his visitors to bathe in the sea at an area called South Hawes. And And he built his first hotel there in 1798. People called him the Mad Duke, simply because it really was a sort of a hotel in the middle of absolutely nothing. But he saw an opportunity to attract visitors from Liverpool and Wigan via the nearby Leeds and Liverpool Canal, running coaches from the canal to his hotel, which he called the Southport Hotel. The name stuck. And from that sort of small start, the town actually grew up northwards along Lord Street. The painting you can see here is from about 1830, and that actually shows that Southport was literally built on sand. It was an urban dunescape. And Lord Street was built behind the row of dunes, which are now part of the promenade. There was rapid growth, as many places of Southport during the Victorian era, which was driven by local wealth. It was facilitated by the railways in about 1848. And also that idea of the promotion of the seaside as a healthy place for invalids. There was very tight control by the landowners, which meant that it actually developed primarily as an upmarket resort and residential area for families of businessmen in Manchester and Liverpool. And we have a retreating sea, which was not helped by the dredging of the River Ribble for the port of Preston, a few miles to the north. But it did present opportunities for land reclamation from about the 1880s. And so the current seafront is actually nearly half a mile away from the original promenade. And I have to say, every time I've been to Southport, I've never seen the sea. So. But it's also now Southport is home to the largest independent flower show in the UK, and it's the centre of England's Gulf Coast, having hosted things like the Open Championships at the nearby Royal Birkdale. So when we're looking at iron and glass, and as Kathryn just sort of pointed out, it's everywhere, but it's really the first sort of key building in Southport was actually the Winter Gardens, which was opened in 1874. And that was on a site between the Promenade and Lord Street, clearly to provide all year-round entertainment and encourage visitors beyond the traditional summer season. And it was designed by Maxwell and Tuke of Bury with two large pavilions. And there's a drawing here on the top left. It was covered by a promenade, but you can see on the right hand, this was actually an iron and glass pavilion, which was advertised as the largest conservatory in England. It was 180 feet long and it was 80 foot tall. But actually its construction made it vulnerable to the elements, and it was actually the conservatory part that was demolished in the 1830s. Overall, the building was popular but not really commercially successful, and it was all completely demolished by about 1962. But like many seaside resorts, iron was used extensively in the public realm. So we can see some examples here. We've got on the bottom left, we've got the Wayfarers Arcade, and all these structures are listed. And the Wayfarers Arcade is effectively the first type of shopping centre, and that was built in 1897. Absolutely beautiful inside, really retained much of its original features. And then we have a lot of the shelters that we can see around sort of King's Garden. So these shelters are everywhere. We've also got Southport Pier, which was opened in 1860, and actually the first, as I've been told, the first pleasure pier constructed in iron. And for quite some time, I believe it was the longest in the country until it got shortened at some point. And so we conceded that to our first place to Southend. And then, of course, there's the verandas. And the verandas are there really to sort of, they provide shelter, they extend the potential season. There's a little image on the top right, which is from the 1920s, where Southport is a charming winter resort, which is quite a nice thought. But the verandas are actually, there's so many of them. I think we have one of the largest collection of intact verandas in the country. So just to show, I was quite interested in this image at the top left, because actually it shows this is from sort of about 1860. And you can see that there's a variety of awnings and covered entrances that are used for businesses along Lord Street. And Lord Street is, if you're not familiar with Southport, it's a wide tree-lined street, and until recently, actually, the main shopping area of the town. And there is a story about Napoleon III having visited Southport briefly and being influenced by boulevards, or for the boulevards in Paris. But how true that is very, very debatable. Verandas serve quite a few purposes, really, because they help protect the products in the shop windows. So most of the verandas are on the seaward side of Lord Street, and so they face approximately south. So they're more prone to goods could be more prone to damage. But they are in existence pretty much along most premises on that side of Lord Street. Clearly, they're good for keeping the rain off, and actually can encourage cafe culture, which was really helpful during COVID, because it meant there was a ready space for people to set up tables and chairs and so on. Now, the verandas are all privately commissioned and individually designed. So there's quite a variation from very decorative Victorian ones to the simpler Edwardian designs and beyond. And some were attached when the buildings were actually built. Some were added at a later date. And some of the verandas actually span several premises. And many of them are actually included within the description for the listed buildings that they're attached to. And although they're all individually designed, there is a sort of relative similarity of scale. So it creates a uniformity down the length of Lord Street. It's very likely that older verandas were varied in colour as well, possibly more reflective of individual owners' tastes. But from about the mid-20th century, the use of black and white colour scheme, which is easier to match when you're coming to repaint them, means that it ties the verandas to create quite a striking appearance down the length of the road. And as I say, it now has Southport now has the most numerous and complete set of verandas in the country, and they all positively contribute to the Lord Street conservation area's aesthetic appeal. And in fact, you've actually got some verandas on the side street. And I just wanted to sort of show the images on the sort of bottom. You've got 227 Lord Street as it was when it was sort of built, sort of about 1860, maybe 1880. And then as it is now next to it. And then you can see on the other side 509 to 515 Lord Street, which has really recently been renovated with assistance through the Townscape Heritage Project. That is an Edwardian veranda, and they used a cantilever system, as you can see, but we'll look at some of the features of a typical veranda. So the common features, obviously, we've got some overhead protection, which is generally Georgian wired glazing panels, which sit between narrow glazing bars that run perpendicular to the buildings. We've got some form of rainwater management. So that can be gutters at the front, which are sometimes hidden or incorporated, and also the rainwater is sort of runoff is incorporated into the cast iron columns. So that enables water to run straight into the sewer system, or sometimes it flows onto the street, which is a bit of a hazard. And the image on the bottom left sort of indicates that. You can see the water would come down, and there's a hole here where it would run off, but here it's sort of piped into the sewer system. Clearly, there's some ornamental decoration on the things like spandrel brackets, on the columns, the capitals, the bases. Some of them have friezes. And some of the verandas retain some of their older wooden signage, which has to be preserved and preferably enhanced if we can encourage people to do that. And we always ask that any new signage for a veranda does require permission, and we don't permit internally illuminated signs on the veranda itself. And as I say, the more modern ones can be cantilever verandas. And at the top, there's just to sort of give you a sense of an elevation and side section of This is from one on Neville Street, which comes off Lord Street. So the drawings are from about 1880, but it gives you a sense of how they're constructed. Now, we tend to have some common structural problems with verandas. So the first thing is broken glass. So this can be because they're attached to buildings, it can be something coming from the top, from above, or it could be that owners don't address any cracked panes early on, so they become hazardous to anyone underneath. And they're required to replace them with Georgian wide glass again. Block gutters, as anyone who deals with any historic buildings knows, rainwater management, it can be quite a problem. And the block gutters and biological debris can build up because Lord Street is tree lined. We've got lots of birds, moss, etc. And this clearly affects the free flow of rainwater away from the veranda. So the elements are more prone to rusting and further biological growth. So it's a sort of ongoing problem. And then also, if you've got a slight difference in height between one veranda and another, if that taller veranda has got a block gutter, that actually is putting more pressure onto the lower veranda. So although rainfall is possibly less frequent now, it's certainly heavier, as we've had over recent weeks. The biological growth, can see it sort of gets into all the detailing, and lots of grime, and the moss tends to hold on to water, and you get algae build up. So if it's not effectively cleaned off, it hides the fine detailing, but also leads to rusting, which causes problems. And that rusting, I mean, with cast iron, it is susceptible to rusting, especially where any element of it traps the water and it's exposed to oxygen at the same time. And if you've got like two different metals in direct contact, so for example, you might have a little element that is made of, say, copper or nickel or something like that, it means that it's the cast iron is more prone to sacrificial corrosion. Painting, the paintwork, again, because of the biological growth, and generally just to keep it looking tidy, chipped paintwork exposes the ironwork to the air. And coupled with the water, it rusts the structure further and causing further damage. And another bit actually that some I find a few of the owners sort of ignore is the timber elements, because there will be some timber elements on some of them, and maintaining that is something they should be doing, but unfortunately it's almost as if it gets missed. And we can see that actually some of the details are susceptible to damage from either the upper floors being poorly maintained, or we can see the larger images on the right hand side of the screen. I've circled where there was the same building taken, I think, 1900 and then recently, and we can see that the fan detail has been lost completely. And it could be that it was damaged through corrosion, it could be it got damaged by accident and then it just got removed because it's easier to not have it, not replace it. So I suspect that was done before any listing. So if we look at one of the, I think, problems is actually, well, there's a few problems with maintaining verandas. So up until about 1986, because the flower show was such a huge draw for tourists, the local authority actually managed the verandas. However, the maintenance is now down to individual owners. And unfortunately, the verandas have become one of the most complained about listed structures from the civic group and local councillors. And that's why sort of I've been brought in to try and keep on top of these. And the issue actually lies with who is ultimately responsible, because we're talking about retail units and then we've got perhaps residential upstairs, perhaps not. We have different sort of ownership. Is it the freeholder? Is it the leaseholder? Absent freeholders, many of them let out the shops on a lease and repair basis. However, recent reports are suggesting that actually there's a changing retail sector and leaseholders are opting for shorter leaseholds, so they're less likely to want to maintain the cost of maintaining verandas. Skilled trades, to be honest, general maintenance of a veranda doesn't need skilled trades. It really is a simple, the simple cleaning gutters and the glass panels and just a wipe down of all the cast iron sections is probably enough to keep them in good condition. And it's really the skilled trades are needed for things like damaged detailing, the metalwork itself. The thing is that because these shop owners or these leaseholders are not likely to want to spend money, they don't want to use their time up for maintaining them. The methods used are quite, generally, I mean, some of we try to encourage owners to make sure that they approach sort of repainting of verandas thoroughly and well. So they have to consider what they're using, how they're using it. We give them instructions and sort of guidance on that. But we also say that, don't be doing it when it's a damp, wet day, because you're just going to, if you take all the paint off, you're going to get water onto the rust. It's going to stay on there. It's not going to get dried and so on. So that's causing problems. So ironworks themselves require sort of scraping of the rust using a compressed air needle gun or a blow lamp and scraper, aiming to not to get the metal too hot, clearly, as that could cause a fracture. And repairs should be carried out and the iron should be primed, but not in wet or humid conditions. So it's making sure they're using the right paint for the purpose. And another issue actually is access, and this sort of image is there really to kind of show how difficult it is. If work is being done on the building above and scaffolding has to come up, that's fine, then verandas can be dealt with then. But actually accessing the verandas may require, in some instances, it may require scaffolding or it may require a cherry picker. And as soon as you start getting some expensive plant machinery, that puts people off spending the money on it. And frequency, I mean, we recommend that owners actually clear out their gutters at least twice a year, preferably sort of autumn and spring, when the sort of just to make sure it's right before winter and effectively after winter, when we have the most sort of leaf fall. And really that they should be dealing with making sure it's clean and in a secure condition as part of their general health and safety checks, so that any issues can be identified quickly. And because obviously monitoring, I mean, they're so significant in Southport that we actually survey them every few months. In fact, it's an ongoing thing, if I'm honest. And I have recently contacted most of the leaseholders and freeholders with a schedule of works for each individual veranda in Southport. So it's encouraging them to do the work, and if necessary, then we can sort of look at enforcement if required to do so. And just this is really just to show we actually developed some guidance for them, which is really good. It's got lots in it. This was sort of developed in conjunction with Historic England, the Civic Society and Sefton Council, going through some of the common problems. And then on the right hand side, you can sort of see some of the schedule of works that I might include, picking the individual elements for each particular business. So it is an ongoing process, an ongoing work to keep on top of them all, but we fight the good fight. Thank you for listening.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, I'll just try and get my video back. Thank you very much, Alex. I mean, it sounds like you're doing a fantastic job keeping on top of it all, but it sounds like it is a very much an ongoing thing, but very good news that you're there and the guidance is there for everybody as well. So if anybody has any questions for Alex, if you want to keep those until the end, and we'll go on to some more wet weather spaces with Faye Davies, who's going to talk to us about the Great Yarmouth Winter Gardens. Faye is Managing Director at Burrell, Foley, Fischer Architects and Urban Designers, and she specialises in the conservation of historic buildings. She's written a thesis on my favourite pier designer and yours, no doubt, Eugenius Birch, and has lots of seaside heritage projects under her belt. She's currently working on the restoration of the West Pier kiosk for the West Pier Trust, but it's going to be the Winter Gardens that she tells us about, and I'm very interested to hear how that's all going, as I'm sure you are, having heard that the funding is in place. What's next, Faye? Please tell us.
Thank you very much. I will just share screen. Let me do full page so you can see. Can everyone see that?
Yes, yeah, we've got it. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Kathryn. As Kathryn said, I'm the director in charge of sort of repurposing and refurbishing the Winter Gardens in Great Yarmouth. I'm going to tell you a little bit about its history and then sort of talk about its past, talk about its present, and talk about the future as well. Because there's quite a lot of history and background information about the Winter Gardens. So I don't know if a lot of people probably already know this, but the Winter Gardens was actually located in Torquay. This is a picture of its opening in 1881, originally designed by a local architect, John Watson, and a London architect, William Harvey. It was sort of, it came to Torquay by the way of shares. So this is the past, basically. The building was originally designed and constructed in Torquay. This is a postcard of its opening in 1881. The reason I know it's from the opening is that the flags which are on display in this building as it stands were lent by a sea captain for the opening. So that I've discovered that through newspaper archives and also the description of how the Torquay Winter Gardens came about. Now, as I was saying, the building was built via shares. So the general public would buy a share for £5, and the original share price, what they were trying to achieve, was 56,000. I think it ended up costing something like 26,000. It works out about £8 million today in today's money. So what was interesting about the Winter Gardens in Torquay is that it wasn't really successful. The original plan for Torquay was the building was going to be situated in 4.5 acres of landscaping, with an aquarium, a bowling alley, tennis courts, a ballroom, but unfortunately it wasn't really successful. And the real purpose of the Winter Gardens at Torquay was really as an event space or concerts. 1,000 to 2,000 people were meant to be able to fill the Winter Gardens itself. And as you can see, the planting is kind of left of the perimeter in here. So basically, it was unsuccessful. But in 1900s, John William Cockrell, who was employed by Great Yarmouth Borough Council, saw an opportunity to bring the Winter Gardens to Great Yarmouth. So it was sold to the Great Yarmouth for quite a handsome, or not handsome, price of only £1,300, so bargain price really. Now this image here is an image which I've just found, and it's of Winter Gardens during construction at Great Yarmouth. And I know that from the fact that it's the new Winter Gardens, and you can just see a little man in the image, sort of standing on the one of the ledges. What's quite interesting about the Winter Gardens is the last surviving seaside Victorian cast iron and glass Winter Gardens in the country. It's Grid 2-star listed, but it's also on the Historic England at-risk register, category C, which means that it has no purpose at the minute. It's been shut since 2008, As you can see from this image, the structure has unusual prominent tiered lanterns. So you can sort of see the tiers coming up through the lantern. And it has really good quality, high decorative cast iron work, but also wrought iron work, both on the interior and the exterior. And when it was built, it's one of the 3 largest cast iron structures in the country. And when it was built in Torquay, it was classed as the Crystal Palace of the West. And that's what the newspaper articles are all sort of quoted saying. But thankfully, it wasn't destroyed. John William Cockrell, who was part of sort of the development of the Golden Mile within Great Yarmouth, brought it to Great Yarmouth. There's quite a lot of debate about what orientation it was going to be put on the seafront, but it's sort of plumped on being next to the Wellington Pier, which you can just sort of see in the background there. Although over time a lot of the fabric has been changed, the cast ironwork and wrought ironwork has been retained. There's been some work done to it over the years, but I shall explain further on. The original Winter Gardens, the cast ironwork was built by someone in Staffordshire, so it's obviously come a far way. And when it came to Great Yarmouth, it came on a barge. And apparently not one single pane of glass was broken when they dismantled it and rebuilt it at Great Yarmouth, which is quite unbelievable given that the structure is, let me just see, it's the length of it's 52 metres, which is 170 feet. The plan is 26 metres wide at the tower, and the height of it is 21 metres. So it's quite a vast building. So just moving on. So this is sort of about a year later after it was open. You can sort of see that they've put in some plantings, some sort of hanging creepers, but you can sort of see the vast amount of people you can sort of get in the building, so you get an idea of the scale. Cockrell hoped to bring a better class of people to the to Great Yarmouth by having this Winter Gardens, and in turn sort of extending the season. So obviously it can be quite blustery out on the East Coast. So he was hoping that the Winter Gardens would extend the season. Obviously it would be better for businesses. So I just scroll on. This is another image looking back towards the tower. There was an organ, and obviously you can sort of see how the spaces was used, and you can sort of see the scale by the people who are sitting around. This is what we call the tower. So when I come to explain about the proposals for the job, you can sort of see what this space is like. The other thing to bear in mind for everyone while they're looking at this is looking at how they had openable windows at high level, and also looking at the detail of the timber screens. So even though this building is really a lot of glass and cast and wrought iron, there's also a lot of timber in this building, and these sort of timber screens in the vertical plane act as sort of a diaphragm, keeping the structure in place as well. So it's quite interesting detail. So over the years, the buildings had to adapt depending on sort of culture, and also trying to create a revenue. It's never been a money spinner, unfortunately. There's been a lot of roller discing. There was a German beer garden. There's been soft play. There's been tea dances. So it's had to adapt, and you can sort of see that there's been plants and then no plants, and then a lot of interesting additions, and it's basically a space which needs to be quite flexible, and was always used for different functions. So the present, like I said earlier, it's been shut since 2008. It's not had a purpose. The way they build, I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with Great Yarmouth, but it's kind of turned its back on the beach. So this area here, I don't know if anyone can see my cursor. This area here is sort of the beach side of the site. Let me just draw. Sorry, I'm just such an architect. This side is the beach, and then this is sort of the main drag, which is the Golden Mile, and where people you can go to the amusement arcade and towards the town centre. So it's not really addressed itself in terms of its context. So that's one of the things just to bear in mind when I show you the proposals going forwards. And it's in a sorry state. Just like Alex was saying, rainwater goods, it's not, the upkeep is, it's costly. If you don't paint it and keep on top of the decoration, you don't keep on the rainwater goods and the maintenance, the building starts to deteriorate. But this also had inherent defects. It was always too hot. They had a problem with humidity in the building when it was in Torquay. They had a problem with the overheating, obviously, but also the cooling and it being cold in winter. So there's always ongoing problems with cast iron, but one of the big problems is rainwater goods. So I've got just a few sheets of cast iron and what the problems are. So the tower is obviously the most monumental section of the building. But, it's this lantern, but the problem with the lantern is there's quite a lot of weight on top of the structure. So inside, during the 1990s, there was this internal frame which holds up the lantern, which has been nicknamed the Zimmer frame. So, and it's quite unsightly and it's quite detrimental to the historical fabric because it hides quite a lot of the decorative trusses. So you can sort of see a photograph here. It kind of sort of detracts from what's inside. But it's actually, the building itself has now become to rely on the Zimmer frame and sort of sits on it. But the problem is, you know, as well, is that any kind of movement, cast iron can shear. So there's a lot of decayed bolts. There's been some historic repairs done in the past. So there's always going to be ongoing repair with the building. And then obviously the weight of the lantern has caused some of the lattice to sort of warp. So you can sort of see the scale of it. In terms of the glazing, the roof glazing has changed over the years. This isn't the original configuration. There were smaller panes in the original design. Again, a lot of it doesn't open, it's fixed. You can sort of see on this middle photograph just how much the timber screen and the glazings have started to sag, and there's openable gaps in the fabric. And it's just in a really sorry state. The things have been boarded up. Windows aren't openable anymore. The fabric has started to rot in terms of the timber screens. There's a lot of this grid on the outside of the building, and that's because a lot of the mullions have rotted and the windows glazing start to slip. So at the minute, there's not only the Zimmer frame, but internally inside the building, there's scaffold, which actually holds a lot of stuff in space, but in place, but also helps us go and we can monitor it in terms of its condition. I think last autumn we had a very big gale, and from the west side of the building, it has started to deteriorate further. So I mentioned about rainwater goods. It's been sort of not resolved over the years. There's these Heath Robinson contraptions of plastic white PVC, which are sort of dotted around the building. And then there's sort of ad hoc temporary repairs to cast iron, which goes within columns. And then there's interesting details from the Victorian time when they had a condensation tray or condensation gutter, so to capture a lot of the water at high level. But ultimately, if you don't keep on top of maintenance, the buildings start to deteriorate. But I think we all know that. The other interesting thing about this is obviously it's the marine environment. It's quite harsh, so you need to pick the right paint, and obviously the best paint for this sort of fabric going forwards will be an oil rig paint. I'm sure Hop will tell you a bit more about that when they talk about piers. And then the cast iron sits on this blockwork plinth or brickwork plinth with these interesting tiles on the sides, sort of cladding. They're in a really bad state. Vegetation sort of been grown everywhere. It's been painted over. It's just not been loved, the building, for a very long time. So the future. So it's quite interesting. We've been working on the project for a very long time. I think 2020 is when we were brought on. We're the third architect to have a stab at trying to secure funding, which we were very successful in obtaining a £10 million grant from Heritage Horizon Fund. And one of the key things about Heritage Horizon Fund is about collaboration and innovation and making sure that the building has a future. So this is sort of how BFF go through the process of working out what's significant, not significant. We look at the historic development of the building. You can sort of see on these elevations, when I was talking about the screens, in that first photograph, you can sort of see that they've been altered over time. None of the original timber screens are in place. They're all being altered. And because it's such a photogenic building, there's a lot of postcard evidence of how and when things changed. So these screens used to have arched openings, arched heads, and they don't anymore. And this changed in the 1950s. So a lot of the screen is all of it's non-original, but that's also the worst fabric affected by deterioration at the minute. And then over the years, there's been added ad hoc detrimental sort of extensions, because obviously the building didn't have enough toilet space, it didn't have a kitchen, it didn't have a bar, and over time it sort of eroded the original form. And also there's been a block built at the back, so now it has no relation to the beach whatsoever. And at some point it would have been open at this end. So this is sort of the significance plan. The colours have come out a bit strange. So you can sort of see the sort of mauve purple colour is sort of the detrimental bolt-ons to the building. And what we're tending to do is remove a lot of the detrimental fabric. That includes the Zimmer frame, which sits inside the building, and try and bring it back to the more pure form, and try and internalize some of the functions. You can sort of see the toilets here at the minute, and things have been sort of added on over time. It doesn't sit on a very big site. That's one of the other complications of this building. It's quite enclosed by buildings both sides now. So this is a work in progress plan, and what we're trying to do is we've got rid of a lot of the bolt-on extensions. We've opened up the building to the beach. Unfortunately, to the south, we are going to need one more block, and this is for the plant room. We've got quite a tight brief on this project. It needs to be a multifunctional space for events, school groups. It needs to have an F&B offer, so food and beverage offer. It needs to have education, but also it needs the business plan to work in terms of kitchen size and being able to have enough covers. So the building kind of needs to wash its face to survive, but at the same time, what we're trying to do is leave as much flexible space as possible, so that in 10 years' time, if a different operator came on board, they wouldn't have to rip everything out. They could just alter what they needed to. So trying to avoid and sort of manage future development as well. The other thing about this building is that we're trying to achieve more sustainable energy. So we're having air source heat pumps, and it's quite difficult when you've got a glass house how to heat and cool the building. But the Victorians did a lot for us. They had a lot of openable windows. They have fans in the building. In the original Torquay scheme, they had curtains which they used to saturate to try and make the building cooler. So there's a lot of stuff what we can learn from the Victorians about how they heat and cool the building, and that's kind of what we're trying to reintroduce within the building as it stands. Entrance hall stays the same. This is a 1910 edition, and then we're rebuilding these two blocks either side. We have to allow for a change in places toilet. We're trying to bring it into the 21st century. We've got to have a certain number of toilets. In this event space, we're making a Heller upstairs. A Heller upstairs is something that you can walk up but also sit on, to try and create a destination within the tower. And then obviously we've allowed quite a lot of arch space for the F&B offer. So these are sort of some of the CGIs which are getting worked up at the minute. One of the difficulties with planting in a building like this is making sure that about the humidity, about how we water it and how we maintain it going forwards, and also making sure that it's not doesn't affect the F&B offer, the food and beverage offer. As you walk up the Heller upstairs, you can get onto this landing, what we call a gallery level. Now, putting blocks internally, if you didn't allow people to walk across the top of them, it kind of just as a dust shelf. So what we're sort of proposing is making sure that people can see the space at different levels. So you can almost, you can touch the cast iron, you can see it at different dimension. And then part of the proposal as well is getting rid of the Zimmer frame, and any of the new structure, which is to hold up the lantern, basically is incorporated within the design. And I think that's it. These are just, that's it in terms of what we're doing in the past, present and future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Faye. It's really exciting to see those proposals, and we look forward. We'll maybe get you back for an update in a little while, but hopefully we can all go over and visit for ourselves. As time is marching on, let's to find out more about the impact of the moment, because I think there is no place where that is more on a pier, and Tristan Banks, our next speaker, knows all about that. He is Director of HOP Consulting Civil and Structural Engineers based in Hove, and has over 11 years of experience in the maritime, ports and heavy civil sector. He's worked on Brighton, Cromer and Worthing piers, and is going to talk to us about his award-winning scheme for Cromer Pier, which has recently won the Peter Mason Award of the National Pier Society. So I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Kathryn. Can everyone hear and see?
Yes, we can.
Good. Right, thank you. Yeah, I'm Tristan Banks, Director at HOP, and I'm going to talk to you today about civil engineering work we've been doing and is ongoing at Cromer Pier. So just a very quick slide about HOP. We are 50 to 60 engineers based in Hove. We do a lot of structural engineering work, civil and marine, which is where I sit. And we do a lot of seaside piers and associated structures. And we do all sorts of design from feasibility through to construction, and manage construction projects and do inspection work. And this is just a few shots of us trying to get our hands dirty and get involved. We do diving work as well, and it's kind of our philosophy to get hands-on and get to know our structures. So that's another quick one of we've worked on loads of piers all around the coast in the past. This is old, there's probably even a couple more to put on there somewhere. So you might spot other piers that aren't Cromer in this presentation as well that I've used the photos from. So today we're going to talk about Cromer. I'm sure you're probably pretty well aware of it. It's a Grade 2 listed pier. 150 metres long, built in 1902. We've been working on it for over 20 years. It's quite a challenging project, and we've been working with the council to maintain it. Previous presentations have all been about sort of above podium level decorative superstructure. I'm potentially talking about the boring bit, which is the chunky metalwork substructure that's supporting everything above and keeping people safe from walking around. Cromer Pier is a nice example of Victorian seaside pier, and is fairly typical with its regular bents of cast iron piles braced together with rails and bracing, with lattice trusses between piles supporting the timber and steel deck. So yeah, this next sort of set of slides are just quickly about sort of the challenges we face. So it's got a picture of Brighton Pier in there. It's obviously a very harsh environment, potentially severe conditions, high winds, high waves to contend with. It's very problematic working underneath piers. It can be very cold. It can be very susceptible to high winds, and is a challenge for our contractors. Access is probably the biggest single issue. And unfortunately, not many piers allow you to dry out at low tide and allow you to carry out a lot of work from underneath. So we have to employ roped access quite a lot, particularly in inspection and work at low level. Where we can, we'd like to scaffold out from the beach or hang that from underneath. That's not always possible. So things like that mobile platform can be used. And of course, we've got diving works as well. And there are a few various other specialist techniques. All presentations before said it, and it's clear of it's, cast iron corrodes, steel corrodes. It's a severe environment. There's a constant battle against corrosion. And the Peter Mason Award work we presented was all based a few years ago, and a new scheme is ongoing right now of a similar size package of works, and these things trundle on and on and on. Piles, trusses, deck beams all continue to degrade, and we need to have a rolling maintenance program in place. Piles are particularly susceptible to scour and abrasion damage. That's where we see the majority of defects on the cast iron piles. We've got another one, I think, next. Yeah, apart from cast iron is great in compression, it's not very good in tension or bending or vibration. So it is susceptible to brittle failure as well. So I think both of those pile head fractures are from different piers. It is a problem that affects a lot of piers, and it can be very difficult to deal with and replace a pile or replace a pile head. And as a general note, most piles are the original piles and have done incredibly well, bearing in mind they've probably been there over 100 years. Next is history. Obviously, Cromer Pier has been built 120 years ago. It's got a huge history to it. I'm sure lots of people will know it better than me. It's also been sectioned in the war, it's been damaged, it's been repaired, there have been modifications, and all those little details make life a bit of a problem sometimes, and a solution applied to one area may not work in another area, and having some knowledge of what repairs and modifications have happened in the past is quite important. So on the next slide, we see barge damage that occurred at Cromer, and that whole section was rebuilt. So the detailing work in that area is completely different to elsewhere, and it kind of adds in a new set of complications to deal with. And while I was looking at this photo earlier, I realised that these trusses that overhang these piles, there's a bit of an unusual way it's failed, still exist today. And I think that when they repaired that, they bolted a new one up to it, and it's still there. And you know, if those trusses are deteriorate in the future, we'll have to look at how the replacement is put in, and it will be completely different to the replacement 2 base down. Next, timbers come up a bit as well, and that kind of goes hand in hand with metal work. There's a lot of timber on the pier. There's a lot to inspect, and it's quite difficult to inspect. Cromer in particular has got a detail where joists, which we call furrings, are laid flat on deck beams, and the deck planks pass over the top, and they're almost impossible to inspect. And you can see in that top picture how the timber deteriorates, and it can be quite tricky to identify. Also, some of the original detailing has issues of this. You might not be able to see it, but this is just a fairly lightweight generator, and its wheel is directly on a deck beam and is deflected a huge amount. And it kind of highlights that some of the original timber detailing that was used isn't really suitable in the modern world. And if we're expecting high loads in that area, we really need to look at the use of timber there, and ideally we would have a steel deck beam underneath. So just move on. So yeah, kind of this is the start of our last campaign for substructure maintenance work, and it always kicks off with a thorough inspection. There are yearly or bi-yearly kind of monitoring inspections, but every so often there's a big thorough inspection where ideally we look at every member at arm's length and grade every member, which is quite an undertaking when there must be hundreds and hundreds of rails and bracings on the pier. So we try and do as much as that as we can ourselves, but of course we need rope access specialists to get into the hard to reach places and divers to look at the below water parts. So once we've done our inspection, we put drawings together like this. So this is trusses. So this kind of indicates the areas where we need to tackle. Each member is graded A to F, F being fail, A being as new condition. And we're looking at replacing all grade Fs, possibly grade Es, possibly grade Ds, depending on budgets and program and sequencing of the works. So I see there's also a bit of design going on here, but design would be put together for all the trusses, and there would be similar drawings for all the deck beams, all the piles, all the rails and bracings. So this is just a quick shot, not very good photograph really, of the deck beam replacement works. So the decking is quite straightforward in a way to replace, of we'd be pulling up all the timber decking, burning out existing deck beams that are grade F and replacing them with new members, installing the new furrings and putting back the timber decking over the top. So that is kind of, although there's lots of rope access techniques used, it's fairly straightforward construction, whereas the rails and bracing are not and are a lot more problematic. It relies heavily on rope access getting into those low areas, which is heavily tidally influenced. So particularly in the pier heads at the lowest level, there might be a matter of hours where you can replace those lowest elements. So we've got here the cross members that are made out of solid bar and new rails that have been put in, which we reuse old railway lines, similar to the originals. So in terms of the above water work, truss replacement is far and away the most difficult activity. So this is showing a new truss that has been fabricated off-site. That would have been hot dip galvanized and painted in factory conditions and then sent down to site, wheeled up the pier and then lowered over the side and chained up into position. Then we'd need to bring in temporary work, so here in the form of a temporary truss to strap up the deck and support that over the piles so that we can remove the original truss underneath that's failed. And then we would be welding in the new truss from underneath. And once that's all welded in and painted up and repacked up to the deck beams, then that's all complete. Where are we? So next, we're just looking at the diving work. So much in the same vein of the above water substructure work, everything needs to be kicked off first in the first instance with a thorough diving inspection. That, of course, even the diving inspection can be quite problematic. There's tides to consider, there's currents. I think the current at Cromer is quite strong, up to 4 knots, if I remember rightly, which is enough to sweep you off your feet. So you need to be doing dive work in a slack water period between high and low tide. And there are hours to undertake that work. So it would be undertaken over several days or weeks, looking for defects below water level, which are mostly at that level to do with scour and holing of the concrete pile encasement around the cast iron piles. So this is what we had found at the beach end at Cromer Pier a few years ago. So we were actually able to undertake this work on these piles at beach level. So it's a good indication of what's required of digging a big hole, getting down to chalk level, which is indicated by this grey water of the chalk is starting to be exposed and the muddy water is starting to become white. And you can see all this needs to be done in probably a 3 or 4 hour window while the tide drops and comes back in again. Once the hole's been dug, we're down at chalk level, which is all confirmed. A large steel shutter is brought in, lifted in place, which needs to be manhandled in location and bolted up. And then in a separate shift, that's all grouted up. And this sort of shows the finished article of a couple of weeks afterwards, and all the sand has returned back to place. But of course, that steel shutter is something like 1.7 meters deep, so it goes well below the foreshore level, and we know it's protected against scour in the future. I'm just going to stop sharing, if I can do that. Oh, let's just try it. No. Right. Okay. People see this? Good. So this is, sorry, it's a bit of a blurred video, but visibility is not always great underwater. So that was the diver jackhammering boulders away from around a pile, and he's using an air lance here to blow away debris. And then this bit of kit is called an airlift, and what he'll be doing in a second is to remove all the debris using that airlift. You can see him pushing all the rocks in, which gets sucked up basically like a hoover. And you can see the white chalk, which is the aim he wants to achieve there. So he's getting some equipment lowered down to him. He's measuring up for the new pile encasement. I've already checked the video, there's no swearing. So you can see the bright white chalk that he's excavated down to now. And then this is a big concrete, half a ring pile encasement being lowered down. And then he can chain that down into position. And then once both halves are together, he can bolt that up. You can see how the visibility is quite poor now. It's probably a couple of foot at best. He spends a long time doing this bolt up. I'm going to skip. Gets his spanners out. So basically that's the pile encasement complete. And then on another visit, they would go back down and fill that up with grout. So you can see it's quite a process, and sometimes just one pile encasement could take a week of diving over 5 shifts. So yeah, this is actually a video from Brighton Pier, but I thought it would be relevant, and it'd be very similar work at Cromer. He hits his head at the end as well. Okay, so that's it. That's us with Alan Partridge on Cromer Pier. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tristan. Thank you very much to all our speakers. Really interesting to see the problems, obviously, but also to hear from people who have got some of the solutions and who are working towards looking after and taking care of our cast iron and metal structures going forward into the future, because I think it's quite clear that they are very important to the sort of seaside sense of place. So thank you very much for sharing all of that. I know we've gone over our sort of allotted hour a bit, but if people are prepared to stay for a few questions, we've got some in the chat or some comments. Laura said about Alex's presentation to start with that the veranda is very similar to those on Mostyn Street in Llandudno. And I think there are some in Saltburn as well, aren't there? So, but you've obviously got the largest collection in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Clevedon Pier and Heritage Trust would like to ask, Tristan, do you use a safety boat when working with roped access? Apparently the rules have changed recently. Does that ring a bell?
Well, if they've changed recently, I'll need to look into it. I think it is a common question, and the stock answer is yeah. Of course, we should have a safety boat. The more it's a little bit more complicated than that. Of under a pier head is incredibly congested with piles, rails and bracing, and it would almost be impossible to actually use that safety boat. And if it were used for a period of time to do a rescue, and the tide goes up or down, and suddenly when it has to reverse out from where it got to, the conditions have just changed. So there's actually a whole load of new risks that enter by using a safety boat. So in that scenario, typically we wouldn't, but there would be other rescue measures put in place, which we would use a specialist rope access company to deal with. And normally they have stretchers and extra people in the team who are able to carry out rescues.
Thank you very much. Did that answer your question, Clevedon?
Yes, sorry, yes. I don't know whether you can hear me.
Good stuff.
I mean, we're doing some major work at the moment on some of the trestles, and it's been quite frustrating because I think we have to have a safety boat, apparently, and yet the tide rips through. And frankly, if somebody fell in, I think, there'd be, the safety boat wouldn't be a lot of use. So I'm sort of interested to know what sort of precedents there are. And it's dig into what, some of the other mitigations that you've talked about.
I think when we've dealt with specialist road access guys in the past, if they haven't worked on a pier, a safety boat appears to be the stock solution. But then if you work it through with them, what the other risks are, it might be that another kind of solution presents itself, I guess.
Fair point. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Caroline has said to Faye, now this is the $100 million question, isn't it? When might the Winter Garden reopen? That's probably, is that impossible to say at the moment, or do you have a plan?
No, we do have a programme. It's sort of 2026. We are dependent on making sure that we secure the funding. So even though we secured the funding, it was for the development phase. We are going to round 2 NHF submission in August, and hopefully that will secure the delivery phase. And then obviously there's quite a lot of detailed design work what needs to be done. But it hopefully all things, good things, fingers crossed that it'll stay on track. Because as the years go on, obviously it deteriorates further. But just to keep everyone's minds at rest, we are doing bits of work to make sure it doesn't fall down in the meantime. So there is some remedial work happening to make sure that nothing bad happens to it.
Good stuff. We're delighted to hear that. I know some people are having to go now, so generally very positive feedback for all of you. Thank you very much. Fascinating talks. Cleethorpes has 6 blocks of different design cast iron balconies as well, so they are a seaside thing, and it's great that those are part of the Townscape Heritage Project. So thank you very much for adding that in as well. And we do want to say before we go that you can all vote for our bucket and spade list. Anya's put the details of that in the chat. So please, if you can contribute to that, we'd love to get your input, because the idea is that we're trying to highlight the best of seaside heritage. I'm trying to think how much cast iron we've got in there. I can't remember now. Please vote for Cleethorpes Pier. We've got the it's for the Papa's Fish and Chips on there. But the exciting thing to announce is that our next, we are having a summer break, but our next event will actually be in person. Unbelievable. We are actually taking the move offline, and we are going to the Blackpool Winter Gardens in the Spanish Quarter. Yes, exactly. Jazz hands. And this will be on the Monday, the 11th of September. It's a free event. It's going to be held from 2 o'clock in the afternoon till 5 o'clock. And this is going to be when we announce our top 10 bucket and spade list. But alongside that, we have also got Wayne Hemingway coming to talk to us about the work that he's done on various seaside heritage projects in Dreamland, Margate, Lowestoft and East Point, and various other things. So that's really exciting. And as many people as we can get there to just network and meet and chat and discuss ironwork and all sorts of other things would be fantastic, because this is our first event, and it would be really great to see as many of you as possible. So you can book your free tickets. The link is in the chat there. Thank you very much. I think everybody is, yes, Wayne did the master plan for Cleethorpes as well. Go Cleethorpes. So do come along. And yes, I think that's probably it for now. I'm sorry there's not a huge amount of time for questions, but I would like to say a very big thank you to our three speakers, Faye, Alex and Tristan. Again, really kind of you to take the time out to speak to us. Really fascinating projects that you're all working with, and thank you very much. Thank you very much as well for everyone for coming, and hopefully see you in Blackpool.
Thanks, Kathryn. Thank you.
Thanks
everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye. See you next time.